June 5, 1944. Night. Southern England. Across hundreds of miles of coastline, engines idle without moving. Radios crackle with traffic that sounds urgent, organized, convincing. Somewhere in the dark, German intelligence officers are listening carefully and drawing exactly the wrong conclusions. If this deception fails, the beaches of Normandy will turn into a slaughterhouse beyond recovery. If it works, tens of thousands of men will survive a day that was never meant to be survivable. What the Germans are hearing tonight is not an invasion. It is a lie large enough to hold an entire war inside it. For months, Allied planners have known a simple truth. Landing in France is not the hardest part. Staying there is. If Germany concentrates its armored reserves in the right place at the right time, the invasion collapses within days. No reinforcements, no second chance, no reset. The beaches are only the beginning. The real danger comes after. Germany has one decisive advantage: interior lines and fast-moving panzer divisions held in reserve. Those divisions are waiting for a single answer to one question. Where will the main landing happen? Operation Fortitude exists to answer that question incorrectly. Not once, not briefly, but so completely that even when the invasion begins, Germany refuses to believe it. The deception does not start with fake tanks or rubber planes. That is the part people remember because it is visible. Fortitude begins much earlier in files, habits, and trust. Allied intelligence understands that Germany does not evaluate information equally. It trusts certain sources more than others, certain agents, certain patterns, certain silences. So the Allies do not invent a new story. They reinforce the one Germany already expects. For years, British counterintelligence has been running a delicate operation. Captured German spies are not arrested loudly. They are turned, fed information slowly, tested, given small truths mixed with harmless lies. Over time, they become reliable in the eyes of Berlin. Their reports shape expectations. By 1944, Germany believes it has eyes inside Britain. It doesn't. What it has is a mirror. Operation Fortitude builds a fictional army from the ground up. A complete formation with command structure, radio chatter, supply problems, and internal friction. On paper, this army is massive, larger than the actual force landing in Normandy. It has a name. It has headquarters. It has movements that make sense if you are looking at maps instead of reality. Its supposed commander is chosen carefully, someone the Germans already fear, already respect, already expect to lead the main blow. His presence alone makes the story believable. Everything points to the Pas-de-Calais. It is closer, it is logical, it is obvious. And obvious is exactly what Germany trusts. Radio operators transmit endless messages. Not random noise, but structured communication with mistakes, repetitions, delays, the texture of a real force preparing for something big. Reconnaissance aircraft are allowed to see certain things and miss others. Camps appear where they should. Vehicles leave tracks. Ships gather where ships would gather. Nothing about Fortitude screams trick. That is its strength. Meanwhile, the real invasion force prepares in silence. Normandy is deliberately starved of signals. Information that might point there is suppressed, delayed, or buried under larger, louder indicators pointing elsewhere. Intelligence is not just about what you reveal. It is about what you allow the enemy to notice. As June approaches, German command grows confident. Too confident. They conclude that Normandy cannot be the main effort. It is too far. The terrain is wrong. The ports are unsuitable. Any landing there must be a diversion, a feint meant to draw forces away from the real blow that will come later at Calais. This belief becomes self-reinforcing. Reports that contradict it are discounted. Reconnaissance photos are reinterpreted. Warnings from officers closer to the front are overridden by the certainty built over months of consistent deception. Fortitude does not need to silence doubt. It only needs to make doubt inconvenient. On June 6th, the invasion begins. Paratroopers land, beaches erupt, ships appear on the horizon in numbers that defy comprehension. German units fight hard, inflict heavy casualties, and send urgent messages up the chain of command. And at the top, the response is hesitation. Because if Normandy is the real invasion, then everything Germany believes about Allied intentions is wrong, and Fortitude has ensured that belief is not fragile. It is deeply rooted, supported by months of evidence, reinforced by trusted sources, confirmed by logic. So panzer divisions remain in reserve. Hours pass, then days. Even as Allied troops pour ashore, even as beachheads expand, Germany waits for the real landing, the one at Pas-de-Calais that never comes. Forces that could have crushed the invasion in its first vulnerable days stay immobilized, held back for an enemy that exists only on paper and radio waves. By the time the truth becomes undeniable, the window is gone. Allied forces are entrenched. Supplies flow freely. Air superiority locks German movement into daylight paralysis. The deception has done its work not by confusing Germany, but by anchoring it, freezing decision-making at the exact moment flexibility was required. Operation Fortitude ends without an announcement. There is no moment where the lie is revealed. It simply becomes irrelevant. The fake army dissolves quietly. Radio traffic fades. Camps empty. The enemy never captures proof of the deception in time for it to matter. Germany does not lose because it lacked information. It loses because it trusted the wrong information too much. Fortitude did not win the war, but it removed Germany's last realistic chance to stop the invasion when it still could have. It turned uncertainty into delay, delay into paralysis, paralysis into defeat. And when Allied troops finally break out of Normandy and race across France, they do so on ground that should have been defended by forces that never arrived. Not because they were destroyed, but because they were waiting for an invasion that existed only in someone else's head. Under the surface, Fortitude keeps demanding maintenance. Every fake unit has to behave like a real one. Radios cannot fall silent at the wrong moment. Messages cannot become too perfect. Small errors have to be introduced on purpose. Delays, misunderstandings, corrections, the kind of friction real armies generate naturally. Too clean, and the illusion collapses. Too messy, and it draws attention. There are nights when operators transmit for hours knowing that no one on their side will ever read the messages they send. Entire shifts exist only to keep a ghost army alive in someone else's mind. Trucks drive in circles to leave tracks that reconnaissance aircraft might photograph. Camps are rearranged not for logistics, but for plausibility. The operation is not clever once. It is careful every day. The danger is never that the Germans will suddenly discover the truth. The danger is slower, that they will notice nothing at all, until something doesn't quite fit, until one report forces them to look twice, until the illusion stops blending into routine and starts demanding explanation. That never happens. Because Fortitude doesn't ask Germany to believe something new. It asks Germany to keep believing what it already believes. That the shortest route matters. That proximity equals intent. That the Pas-de-Calais is the obvious choice. That obvious choices are the safest ones. By the time June arrives, this belief has weight. It shapes deployment, it shapes readiness, it shapes the way reports are read and dismissed. Normandy becomes background noise, something to monitor, not something to fear. And then, early on June 6th, the background explodes. Landing reports flood in, paratroopers behind the lines, naval bombardment, beaches under assault. Units in Normandy call for reinforcements and get silence in return. Requests move upward, filtered through assumptions that have been hardening for months. At higher levels, the reaction is not disbelief. It is delay, because if this is the real invasion, then everything built by Fortitude was wrong. And Fortitude has been too consistent, too reinforced, too comfortable to abandon quickly. Commanders wait for confirmation that never comes. They expect the second blow, the one they have been preparing for, to fall at Calais any hour now. Hours turn into a day turns into two. Armored divisions that could have counterattacked while the beaches were still fragile remain fixed in place, waiting for orders that depend on an enemy that does not exist. By the time movement begins, Allied forces are no longer exposed. They are dug in, supplied, protected by air power that locks German armor into immobility whenever the sun is up. The invasion survives its most dangerous phase not because it was unstoppable, but because it was not immediately challenged. That gap is Fortitude's achievement, not confusion, but confidence misdirected, not ignorance, but certainty pointed the wrong way. When German command finally accepts that Normandy is the main effort, the realization comes without drama. No admission of error, no sudden collapse of belief, just a quiet shift in tone as reality forces itself past the illusion. By then, the deception no longer needs to exist. Radio traffic fades. Fake units dissolve without ceremony. The paper army disappears the same way it lived, without ever being confronted directly. There is no moment where Germany discovers fortitude. There is only the moment where it stops mattering, and that is the measure of its success. Operation Fortitude does not end the war. It does not win the invasion by itself, but it removes the last chance Germany had to stop it while it was still vulnerable. It turns speed into safety, time into terrain. When Allied forces break out of Normandy weeks later, they do so against an enemy already reacting late, already moving second, already paying for decisions made in confidence months earlier. The beaches are remembered for courage and sacrifice. Fortitude is remembered, if at all, for silence, for messages sent to no one, for armies that never moved, for a war decided not just by what happened, but by what Germany waited too long to believe wasn't coming. Even after Normandy is secured, the effects of fortitude linger. German commanders do not immediately redeploy everything north. The fear of a second landing persists longer than logic justifies. Units remain tied down, guarding empty coastlines. Resources are spread thinner than they should be. The deception continues to cast a shadow, not because it is still active, but because it has already reshaped expectations. This is the part that rarely makes it into summaries. Fortitude does not simply delay German armor on June 6th. It poisons decision-making for weeks afterward. Every move is made with the anxiety that another blow might still be coming. Every redeployment risks being the wrong one. The confidence Germany had in its own intelligence, once an advantage, becomes a liability. And that confidence does not collapse easily. Reports from Normandy grow more alarming by the day. Beachheads expand, artificial harbors appear. Supply tonnage increases beyond anything a diversion should sustain. Yet the instinct to hedge remains. Commanders argue not about whether Normandy matters, but about how much it matters compared to what they still expect at Calais. Fortitude has done something subtle and devastating. It has split German attention at the exact moment unity is required. While Allied forces push inland, German reserves arrive piecemeal, late, and without the concentration that might have changed the outcome. Counterattacks are launched with insufficient strength. Opportunities close before they are fully recognized. The invasion survives long enough to become irreversible. None of this is dramatic in isolation. There is no single order that dooms the German response. No clear moment where someone says, "We were fooled." Instead, fortitude works the way inertia works. It turns early assumptions into anchors, anchors into hesitation, hesitation into lost time. By the time German command fully abandons the expectation of a second landing, the war in France has already shifted phases. What might have been an emergency has become a retreat. What might have been decisive has become academic. And still, fortitude never reveals itself. The agents who fed Berlin its most trusted information are never exposed in time. The radio operators never receive replies from the army they pretended to be. The inflatable tanks are packed away without ever being attacked. The greatest deception of the war leaves behind almost no physical evidence that it existed at all. Its footprint is visible only in absence, in divisions that never moved when they should have, in orders that came hours too late, in opportunities that existed only briefly and were missed forever. The men landing on the beaches never hear the radio traffic fortitude generated. They never see the maps German commanders studied. They only feel the result: fewer tanks than expected, slower reactions, a window that stays open just long enough. That window is the invasion. And once it closes behind them, Fortitude has finished its work. What makes Fortitude unsettling is that it never confronts its target directly. There is no clash, no reveal, no moment where German intelligence officers look at a board and realize they've been defeated. The operation works precisely because it never forces that reckoning. It lets assumptions decay on their own, quietly, until they are no longer useful. And by then, it's too late to replace them. Inside German command, the failure is never framed as deception. It is framed as bad timing, bad luck, bad coordination. A series of reasonable decisions that simply didn't line up. That interpretation is easier to live with than the alternative, that an entire decision-making structure was guided patiently toward the wrong conclusion. Fortitude exploits something deeper than misinformation. It exploits commitment. Once resources are allocated, once units are positioned, once commanders have argued for months that a certain outcome is inevitable, reversing course becomes psychologically expensive. Every hour that passes increases the cost of admitting error. Fortitude feeds on that cost, stretching it until delay becomes indistinguishable from choice. This is why the deception holds even after Allied troops are firmly ashore. German commanders don't doubt the landings. They doubt their significance. They believe the real threat is still forming elsewhere. That belief doesn't disappear just because new information arrives. It competes with it. And Fortitude has had months to entrench itself. By mid-June, the invasion front is widening. Allied forces are linking beaches, securing ports, pouring men and materiel into France at a rate no diversion could sustain. And still, German reserves hesitate. Still, orders hedge. Still, the expectation of a second blow lingers like a shadow that refuses to detach. Fortitude has shifted the war into a different tempo. The Allies act. Germany reacts. And reaction in modern war is almost always too late. The operation never asks for brilliance. It asks for consistency, for patience, for the discipline to maintain a lie long enough that it stops feeling like one. And by the time reality demands correction, the opportunity to correct has already passed. This is the danger zone of Fortitude, not the beaches, not the airborne drops, but the days immediately after. The window where German armor could still move, still concentrate, still strike decisively if it commits fully. That window narrows by the hour, and Fortitude keeps it from ever opening wide enough. By the time German command finally accepts that there will be no second landing at Pas-de-Calais, the realization arrives without urgency. There is no alarm bell, no sudden shift from confidence to panic, just a gradual reluctant adjustment, an acknowledgement that the expected blow is not coming, and that the one already unfolding has grown too large to dismiss. That delay is fatal. Panzer divisions begin to move in earnest only after Allied positions have solidified. Roads are cratered, bridges are destroyed by air attack, fuel is scarce. Movement happens under constant threat from the sky. What might have been a decisive counterstroke days earlier becomes a series of fragmented engagements that bleed strength without changing direction. Fortitude has done what no battlefield success alone could guarantee. It has stolen Germany's timing. The deception never needed to survive indefinitely. It only needed to hold long enough for the invasion to pass its most fragile phase. Once Allied forces could not be pushed back into the sea, the strategic equation changed permanently. From that moment on, Germany is no longer trying to stop an invasion. It is trying to manage a defeat. And Fortitude fades from view. The agents return to silence. The radios stop transmitting. The fictional units are quietly dissolved. There is no debriefing with the enemy, no confession extracted, no acknowledgement from the other side that they were manipulated. The operation ends the same way it operated, without confrontation. For the soldiers who fought in Normandy, Fortitude remains invisible. They measure the battle in blood, terrain, and survival. They do not see the armored divisions that stayed idle. They do not hear the arguments inside German headquarters. They experience only the outcome, resistance that arrives late, attacks that lack coordination, an enemy always one step behind. That is the paradox of fortitude. Its success is inseparable from its anonymity. Had it failed, it would be famous for all the wrong reasons. Because it succeeded, it disappears into the background of the invasion it helped protect. It leaves behind no ruins, no graves, no monuments. Only a sequence of decisions that never quite aligned when alignment mattered most. In that sense, fortitude represents a different kind of warfare, one where victory is achieved not by destroying the enemy's forces, but by shaping how they understand the world long enough for reality to overtake them. The beaches of Normandy are remembered as the moment the war in Western Europe turned. Fortitude ensured that when that moment came, Germany was still waiting for something else. And by the time it stopped waiting, the war had already moved on without it. After the war, Operation Fortitude becomes something historians struggle to categorize. It doesn't fit cleanly into narratives of courage or sacrifice. No one stormed a beach because of it. No city was liberated directly by its hand. Its success can't be photographed, its failures can't be counted. It exists almost entirely in negative space, in the actions that didn't happen, in the forces that didn't move, in the decisions that arrived just late enough to be useless. That makes it easy to underestimate. But inside military planning rooms, fortitude leaves a deeper mark than many battles. It demonstrates a reality that is uncomfortable to admit, that modern wars can be decided not only by force, but by perception. And that perception, once shaped, resists correction even in the face of evidence. The German command was not blind. It was not incompetent. It was operating with information that had been made coherent, logical, and wrong. Fortitude didn't flood the system with noise. It gave it clarity in the wrong direction, and clarity is persuasive. That is why the deception had to be patient. A lie told too loudly invites scrutiny. A lie reinforced slowly becomes an assumption. Fortitude lived long enough to cross that threshold. By the time the invasion began, the false narrative was no longer competing with reality. It was framing it. Normandy was interpreted through Calais. Every report was filtered. Every warning was weighed against months of certainty. German commanders didn't ignore what they saw, they explained it away. And explanation is far more dangerous than denial because it feels rational. This is the quiet power fortitude reveals. Not the ability to deceive once, but the ability to make the enemy complicit in maintaining the deception themselves. To let them invest time, resources, and reputation into a belief until abandoning it feels more dangerous than holding on to it. That dynamic doesn't end in 1944. It becomes a template, studied, debated, and quietly feared, because it suggests that the most decisive battlefield might exist entirely inside the opponent's decision cycle. That shaping belief can be as effective as destroying capability, if it is done early enough and held long enough. Fortitude succeeds because it understands something fundamental. Wars accelerate faster than institutions can rethink their assumptions. Once momentum builds, there is very little room to stop and reassess. Decisions are made based on yesterday's conclusions, applied to today's crisis, and carried into tomorrow's failure. By the time Germany reassesses, the Allies are already beyond the beaches, beyond containment, beyond reversal. And fortitude disappears into that forward motion, having served its purpose. It never asks to be remembered. It simply ensures that at the moment when history could still have turned the other way, Germany was looking in the wrong direction with complete confidence that it was right. And that confidence is the most dangerous artifact fortitude leaves behind, because it shows how easily certainty can outlive reality. German commanders were not irrational. They were not reckless. They were operating inside a framework that had worked before, a framework built on geography, precedent, and intelligent sources they had learned to trust. Fortitude didn't shatter that framework. It occupied it. It used its strength against itself. By the summer of 1944, the consequences are no longer theoretical. Every delayed movement compounds the next. Every misallocation tightens the trap. When German forces finally attempt to respond decisively, they do so under conditions shaped entirely by earlier hesitation, limited fuel, destroyed infrastructure, constant air attack, fragmented command. The window Fortitude helped create has closed. From that point on, events move with a momentum that no deception is required to sustain. Allied advances accelerate. German withdrawals become permanent. What began as a calculated delay turns into an irreversible loss of initiative. And still, there is no moment of revelation, no captured document where the deception is laid bare in time to matter, no confession from an agent that reaches the right desk soon enough, no acknowledgement inside German command that Fortitude ever truly existed as an operation. It remains an explanation applied after the fact, not a realization that alters behavior. That absence is the final layer of the deception. Because Fortitude doesn't just mislead the enemy during the war, it denies them the clarity of understanding how they were defeated. It leaves behind only outcomes, not causes, a strategic blind spot that persists long after the fighting stops. The Allied invasion succeeds for many reasons: overwhelming resources, industrial capacity, air superiority, sacrifice on the ground. Fortitude does not replace any of that. It simply ensures that all of it arrives at the worst possible moment for the enemy. Not before Germany is ready, but before it understands it is no longer ready. That distinction is subtle and decisive. Operation Fortitude is not remembered because it was dramatic. It is remembered because it was precise. Because it understood that in modern war, the most valuable terrain is not always physical ground, but time. And time can be stolen without a single shot being fired. And once stolen, it cannot be recovered. Germany waited for an invasion that never came, while the real one grew too large to stop. And by the time the illusion dissolved, history had already committed to a different outcome, one shaped quietly and deliberately by a war that existed only in signals, assumptions, and the long, dangerous comfort of being sure you were right. By late summer, Fortitude no longer needs to exist for its effects to persist. The German army is now fighting a war of reaction, not initiative. Every move is constrained by what should have happened earlier. Every counterattack is launched with the awareness that it is already late. The strategic momentum has shifted so completely that even correct decisions arrive into the wrong circumstances. This is where the deception reveals its final shape. Fortitude was never about making Germany believe something false forever. It was about making Germany believe it long enough that changing its mind became impossible without accepting disaster. And institutions, especially under pressure, resist accepting disaster until it is unavoidable. When German commanders finally commit fully against Normandy, they do so knowing the odds are no longer in their favor. The opportunity to strike decisively has passed. The invasion has hardened into a front. The front has turned into a campaign. The campaign is becoming a collapse. What Fortitude exposed was not a weakness in German intelligence, but a weakness in certainty itself. Once a conclusion has been reinforced by time, consistency, and apparent logic, it gains inertia. New information doesn't replace it. It bends around it. That is the moment Fortitude was designed to reach. The moment when truth arrives too late to matter. From the outside, it looks like hesitation. From the inside, it feels like caution. And caution in war is often indistinguishable from surrender once the tempo has shifted. There is no parade for Fortitude, no battlefield marker, no moment where soldiers cheer because a deception worked. The men who built it never see its effects directly. They only see that something did not happen when it should have. That resistance arrived weaker than expected. That the enemy seemed always a step behind, reacting to yesterday instead of anticipating tomorrow. That absence is the success. Because Fortitude's real victory is not that it fooled Germany. It is that it forced Germany to fool itself. And once that process began, no amount of force on the ground could fully undo it. What Fortitude ultimately demonstrates is how fragile decision-making becomes when it is trapped by its own logic. By the time German command understands that the expected second landing will never come, the realization carries no urgency because urgency itself has been spent. The ability to act decisively has already been consumed by weeks of waiting, reallocating, and justifying delay. The system has protected itself from panic, and in doing so, protected itself from adaptation. That is the quiet failure Fortitude engineers. Not a collapse under pressure, but a slow narrowing of options until every remaining choice is bad. Move now and expose the coast that was defended for months. Move later and accept that the invasion has already matured beyond containment. Either way, the cost feels unacceptable, which is exactly where Fortitude wants the enemy to be. Caught between explanations, caught between assumptions, caught between moments that no longer exist. From the Allied side, none of this feels clean or guaranteed. The men planning Fortitude never know for certain that it will hold. They only know that without it, the invasion's margin for survival shrinks dangerously. The deception is not insurance. It is leverage applied against time. And time responds. Every hour German armor remains stationary is an hour Allied engineers build, unload, reinforce. Every day of hesitation turns temporary beachheads into permanent footholds. Every delayed order rewrites the future without announcing that it has done so. Fortitude doesn't force Germany to choose wrong. It lets Germany keep choosing later. That distinction matters. Because later feels reasonable, later feels cautious, later feels responsible. And later, in June of 1944, is fatal. By the time the German command structure finally aligns itself fully against Normandy, the invasion has crossed an invisible line. Not a geographic one, but a strategic one. The line where an enemy can still be pushed back, versus the line where he must now be fought until exhaustion. That crossing happens quietly, without fanfare, without a single decisive moment anyone can point to afterward. And that is why Fortitude works as well as it does. By the time German command finally stops waiting, there is a brief, dangerous realization. Not panic, not collapse. But understanding that the invasion they prepared to defeat somewhere else has already survived where it matters. That the moment when armor could have driven the Allies back into the sea has passed without ceremony. That the delay was not a pause. It was the decision. Panzer units begin to move, but now they move into a different war. Roads are broken. Fuel is scarce. Air power rules the daylight. What should have been a single, crushing counterstroke becomes a series of desperate, isolated reactions. Each one arrives just late enough to fail on its own. There is no dramatic reckoning inside German headquarters. No moment where someone slams a table and names the deception. The realization spreads quietly, through tone changes, through shortened messages, through orders that stop hedging and start accepting loss. Normandy is no longer a question. It is a fact. And Fortitude, the thing that kept Germany waiting for certainty, has already finished its work. When historians later try to measure Operation Fortitude, they often struggle with the same problem the Germans faced in 1944. There is nothing to point to. No battlefield where it can be walked. No wreckage where it can be photographed. No casualty figures that prove it existed. Fortitude leaves behind only consequences. Germany does not lose Normandy because its soldiers fail to fight. They fight hard. They fight well. They inflict real damage, but they fight inside a frame that has already shifted against them. They fight too late with forces committed in the wrong order under assumptions that no longer match the war unfolding in front of them. By the time German command fully accepts that there will be no second landing, no larger blow waiting across the channel, the invasion has passed the point where belief matters more than reality. Normandy has become a front. A front becomes a campaign becomes a retreat, and retreats, once they begin, rarely reverse. Fortitude never needed to convince Germany that Normandy was impossible. It only needed to convince Germany that Normandy was incomplete, that it was not yet the real thing, that the decisive moment was still ahead, that waiting was the responsible choice. And waiting felt rational, until it wasn't. This is what makes Fortitude so difficult to confront honestly. It does not reveal a clever trick. It reveals a vulnerability that exists in every complex system. The longer a belief is reinforced, the more dangerous it becomes to abandon it. The more evidence supports it, the harder it is to question. And when that belief becomes embedded in planning, deployment, and prestige, changing course starts to feel more reckless than staying wrong. Germany did not fail because it lacked information. It failed because it trusted the information it had too deeply. Fortitude transformed intelligence from a tool into an anchor. It ensured that every new report was interpreted through conclusions already reached. Normandy was never ignored. It was explained away. And explanation is far more lethal than disbelief. When the war in Western Europe accelerates after the breakout from Normandy, the deception no longer needs to exist. Its effects are already baked into the timeline. German units are out of position. Decision cycles are slowed. Opportunities that exist only briefly pass without recognition. The invasion succeeds not because Germany never reacts, but because when it does, it reacts to yesterday. That delay compounds everything that follows. Cities fall faster. Supply lines collapse sooner. Retreats turn chaotic. What could have been a prolonged, grinding defense becomes a race the Germans are already losing before they understand it has begun. Fortitude never celebrates this outcome. It never announces itself. It never forces Germany to admit it was fooled. The deception fades quietly, leaving behind a war that now moves in only one direction. And that is the most unsettling part, because Fortitude does not belong to a past era of trickery or cleverness. It belongs to the mechanics of belief. To the way organizations protect certainty when uncertainty becomes too costly to confront. To the way delay disguises itself as caution, until caution becomes surrender. The men who landed on the beaches carried rifles, equipment, fear, and hope. The men who built Fortitude carried none of that. They carried patience, consistency, and understanding that in war, the most valuable thing you can take from your enemy is not territory, but time. Time to land, time to reinforce, time to survive the moment when everything is still fragile. Germany waited for an invasion that never came, and while it waited, the real one grew strong enough that it no longer mattered. Operation Fortitude did not win the war, but it ensured that when the war's most dangerous gamble was finally made, the enemy was still looking in the wrong direction, absolutely certain that waiting was the safest choice. By the time certainty collapsed, history had already moved on, quietly.